As always, I, Alexei Matsuka, and Serhii Leshchenko, advisor to the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, here in the studio are discussing the current agenda in Ukraine and the world. Last week, European Council President Charles Michel promised to do everything possible to ensure that Ukraine and Moldova receive a decision on the start of EU accession talks by the end of the year. The fact is that we are on the eve of a summit where some decision will be taken. What do you think Charles Michel can do? Is it possible to get the decision to start negotiations?
We need to explain that Charles Michel is the man who is at the head of the entire power vertical in the European Union, meaning that he is the head of the European Council. This is a summit at the level of the top officials of the European Union, since the EU is an association of states that are governed by their leaders. Of course, all decisions are made there, at the highest level. Recommendations for them are prepared by Ursula von der Leyen and the European Commission, the EU cabinet. And now this is the time of shuttle diplomacy for Charles Michel. He will go to Budapest, among other places, to talk to Orban, to understand how he can change his position. But I will not hide the fact that it is simply a question of finance. Perhaps some steps for Hungary's side, so Hungary may get more money from the EU budget and change its rhetoric. This is a rather realpolitik approach from Orban's side. He probably looked at Erdogan, how he put a barrier for NATO membership for Finland and Sweden, and decided that the same method could be used with the EU. And of course, many members of the European Union were not happy about it, because in fact, it is such blackmail when one of the member states saying that its priorities are higher than the priorities of the whole association.
Maybe it's Orban's values.
The last thing we need to do is to evaluate the leaders of the European Union, at least while we are not yet a member of this union. This is the choice of the citizens of Hungary, which we respect, as well as, by the way, the choice of the citizens of the Netherlands, who also voted for a party of populists and Eurosceptics, led by one of these, let's say, pro-Trump leaders inside the European Union, Geert Wilders. And we'll see where it leads in the end. Our policy is built on the fact that the EU as a union, it is not only a union of countries where every state has a voice, but it is everybody's opinion, where everybody has a part of the sovereignty in Brussels. And Brussels is also important in that sense. That's why I'm trying to explain that Charles Michel, as the bearer of this united sovereignty of the EU countries, as the person who has collected the powers from each of the countries, his functions now is to persuade these countries not to put their veto. However, inside the EU itself, they have already started to discuss that it is necessary to move away from this decision by so-called consensus, when the decision can only be taken if there is no one against it.
There is an opinion that the EU has the political will to accept us as a member, but it does not have the will to turn a blind eye to the shortcomings in Ukraine's reforms. What requirements and deficiencies are we talking about, and are they all being fulfilled and eliminated by the Ukrainian authorities?
They were all articulated by the European Commission, and in the last week this work has already started. You know, we should not immediately bury ourselves in reflection, saying what losers we are. Some countries have been doing their homework for a very long time. Ukraine has done it in the express method and actually received encouragement from the European Union. We can get a mandate for negotiations as early as next year. So the Europeans will give us a mandate for negotiations already next year, while some countries in the Balkan region have been waiting for several years for this mandate to be given by the Europeans, by the European bureaucrats in their negotiation group. So it could be 4 or 5 times faster for us. We should explain that these necessary steps still need to be taken. For example, to increase the staff of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau by 300 detectives. It is a rather technical issue. It applies more to the independence of the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, which is already independent. You know that the head of the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecution is elected with the participation of the international community. He is independent of the Prosecutor General. He is only formally called so, but really he is even more independent. I will tell you that all the reforms that other EU countries made before joining the EU were all technical. Often, when the process of integration starts, it comes to the point where, cucumbers or bananas had to reach a certain size standard and bending angle. And it is not a joke. The EU has special requirements for cucumbers. We must also admit that the European Union, of course, is the highest level of democratic development. There has never been a union like this in Europe ever in history. It is the longest-lasting project of democracy.
Based on common values.
Yes, based on values. But of course, this kind of opinion generates bureaucracy. You also have to understand that every official starts looking for additional work, inventing something to get a good European salary for it. And accordingly, there even at the level of EU Commission, each country delegates a commissioner. The more countries, the more commissioners have to be invented. And when Ukraine becomes a Euro member, our commissioner will be responsible for some sphere too. Maybe even for the defense complex of the European Union.